Hello, everyone, and welcome to the WaiSYMPOSIUM 2021 by the Women in AI Canada. Today, we are highlighting some of the key Canadian leaders in AI, and we can't wait to listen to them. Let me start by sharing the agenda for today. We'll start with a bit of introduction to women in AI. Then we'll have the most awaited presentations from AltaML about AI in industry. Next AI Montreal will present about AI startup accelerator, and women in AI and University of Alberta researchers will speak about selected topics in AI research. If you have any questions for our speakers, you will get your chance at the end of the sessions. So please stay tuned. Let me talk about women in AI. It's a non-profit do tank working towards gender-inclusive AI that benefits global society. We are community-driven. We bring empowerment, knowledge, and active collaboration via different activities. Currently, we are more than 8,000 members coming from 130 countries, and our reach is more than 20,000 globally. We have a very active Slack channel if you're interested to join. Please visit our website, womeninai.co, to learn more about it. So our community is based on mutual support, and our mission is to close the gender gap in the field by educating, empowering the next generation of female leaders in AI. We operate through a network of ambassadors and city leads responsible for growing their local communities. So these are the core values that we stand with: diversity and inclusion, responsible AI are a strong focus for us. We inspire, educate, and connect with our community through various activities like Why Time, Why Talk, Why Accelerator, which is a startup accelerator, Why Camp, Why Educate, and WaiSYMPOSIUM, and much more. We are going to launch our Why Awards North America next year in order to celebrate the contributions of women in artificial intelligence in North America. We are very fortunate to have support from our partners locally and globally. We have a core team who is responsible for each cities and overall verticals in Canada. We have an extended team who is also supporting us running all these activities. Currently, we have presence in 6 major cities, and we are planning to expand. That leads me to our call for volunteers. We are looking for city leads in Quebec City, Saskatoon, Winnipeg, and more volunteers to lead mentorship, content, and engagement. We have a lot of plans for next year, and we want you to join us so that you can contribute back to the community. We'll share the link for filling the application form shortly on the chat. Here is the most exciting upcoming event that we have, where CEO of Ethically Aligned AI, Katrina Ingram, will talk about the personal and practical aspects of AI ethics. Do register if you have not already. This is going to be a great event as well. That leads me to today's conversation, which is WaiSYMPOSIUM. Today, we are honored to have distinguished women leaders from industry, startup accelerators, and universities in one single platform. Each industry expert will cover various topics. This event will be divided into 3 parts. The first session will be about AI in industry, presented by AltaML, a leader in elevating business through AI and winner of Canada's Companies to Watch in Deloitte's Technology Fast 50 Awards. The second session will be about AI startup initiatives, presented by Next AI Montreal, a world-class program for AI-based ventures and technology commercialization. The final session will be about AI in research, presented by University of Alberta, Faculty of Science, home to some of the top AI and machine learning research in the world. Let me now invite our Toronto City lead, Shiyamali, to introduce our first speakers of today's WaiSYMPOSIUM.
Thank you, Frincy, for the introduction. Once again, we welcome our speakers and audience to our first WaiSYMPOSIUM. To begin our event today, first we have 2 fantastic speakers from AltaML and AlphaLayer joining us to touch on the topic of AI adoption. Our first speaker is Nicole Jensen. She is a co-founder and co-CEO of AltaML. AltaML is an applied AI studio driven by purpose to elevate human potential, and they are committed to using AI for good. They develop powerful software applications that create efficacies, mitigate risk, and drive revenue. In 2020, the AltaML received the Deloitte Technology Fast 50 Award, which demonstrate emerging companies that exhibit strong growth and superior technology. AltaML has been one of our gold sponsors for Women in AI since its inception, and they have offices in Edmonton, Calgary, and Toronto. Our speaker today, Nicole, she is passionate about community and currently serves as a board member of Innovate Edmonton. Nicole has served as a director for Junior Achievement of North Alberta for 5 years, including 2 years as chair. Thank you, Nicole, for joining us today. And let me introduce our next speaker, followed by Nicole. She is Kiana Adams, as a Senior Project Delivery Manager from AlphaLayer. Kiana is a project management professional with experience leading complex initiatives in the investment management and not-for-profit sectors. Before joining AlphaLayer, Kiana held investment operations roles at AIMCO and Sun Life Global Investment. Thank you, Kiana, for joining us today as well. And now I will pass it on to our speakers to begin their presentation. Just a small request for audience. If you have any questions during our presentation, feel free to drop it in our question box or chat box, and we will take it up at the end of the event. Thank you.
Thanks for that great welcome. I'll get started here. So thanks for having us here today. I'm Nicole, and Kiana will also be joining me. I'm with AltaML, and AltaML is an applied AI studio, and we build software applications with machine learning at the core. Kiana is from AlphaLayer, which is one of our spin-offs, which is focused on AI solutions and products in the investment management space. And that's why we're coming together here today to talk to you about AI adoption from the industry perspective. We've worked with over 300 use cases and more than 75 different clients, which has shown us just how challenging AI adoption can be. But without adoption, AI can never be fully utilized, which is why we want to talk about it today. There's a large opportunity in AI globally. It's estimated at 13 trillion over the next decade. But despite that, in a 2019 survey, we found that 8% of companies only were engaging in adoption. Most companies have been focusing on experimentation to this point. But now the companies, especially with the acceleration from COVID, are really wanting to see where's the ROI in all of this investment. Turns out AI adoption, not quite so easy, and companies are starting to see that. So I'm going to go through 4 of the biggest challenges we've seen with some of our clients. Fear, it's a big one. One of the most common questions we hear is, am I going to lose my job? Media portrays AI as killer robots coming to take over the world. There's plenty of fear around data and the privacy of personal data. So how we recommend combating this is first acknowledging it. Don't sweep it under the rug. It only amplifies the fear. Start small, get a small win with a small project, showcase what AI can do and how it will impact positively the company, but also try to avoid choosing that small bet to be around a use case that you expect to reduce headcount, because that will just amplify that fear of losing your job. Enroll the end user from the very beginning. Identify those affected roles, help them be a part of building that solution and understand where their pain points are so that you can ensure that the solution really is helping them. More often than not, what we're finding though, is that within the workforce, it's more of an augmentation to the existing workforce. We're seeing very few reductions of work. Education is another big one. What is machine learning? Most people don't even know. And then what potential use cases and impacts are available for that industry. Clear messaging, it's got to come from the entire leadership team, not just a few, and it needs to be consistent messaging. Speak about the benefits both to the organization and the individual. Privacy policy needs to be very strict. People need to feel comfortable about how the PII is going to be protected. And it needs to be continual education around that policy and also continually updating that policy. Fear number 2, operationalization. Say that word 3 times fast. I've tried, it's not good. Integrations are difficult. Companies often don't have the expertise internally to support the integrating and deploying of within their systems. And not enough time is spent to understand how the model will fit into existing workflows. That needs to be considered right at the get-go. Maintenance is often not considered at the onset either. ML models are living and they evolve over time, and they need to be monitored to ensure that the models don't begin to drift. And that means you need resources who can not only manage the data drift, but the infrastructure required, and ensuring that the model uptime is clear. Imagine, we've all gotten used to our backup cameras. Imagine if all of a sudden one day that backup camera didn't exist. I don't know if I would know how to back up my car, to be honest, at this point. I've gotten so used to it. And you can see how in a workflow, when that becomes a key component of your workflow, how if that model is down, it really will impact that. Biggest blockers really slow down the process. All organizations have them. We can't be naive about that. They are there. How we combat that? Take the slow approach to integration if necessary to ensure that the end user has the least amount of disruption. Have a dedicated technical team for the integration, and also for the many, many questions that will come and the challenges that will come with an integration. Setting expectations right up front about the required maintenance will ensure everyone who's impacted is aware and has awareness of how much time that might impact their workflow. And then the systems have to be created to support that maintenance. Identify those biggest blockers as soon as possible. Set out a strategy to turn them into the biggest champions. Often, IT team, sorry if anybody here is from IT, can be the most risk averse. Just that's their career. They've been, they've spent their entire career being risk averse, and something like this feels risky. So forge the relationship really early, long before integration with the IT team. But have that integration being led by a business-focused individual who can really speak to the benefits. Responsible AI. The question I often get asked is, how did the model make the prediction? It's seen as a black box, and this makes it hard to explain to not only the end user, but also in many companies' cases, regulators, board members, and other stakeholders that are key to understanding that. Managing bias and fairness. Bias data creates biased results and just simply amplifies the bias. So how do we work against that? We integrate explainability. Ensure that the end user can see how the model made a decision. The ability to explain it is crucial to gain trust in the model. And also having that end user understand the percentage accuracy that was gained from the training data, so that knowing that the human decision-making is still required in the process most of the time. Run a parallel workflow during the pilot stage. That helps gain trust, as individuals can see how their past way of doing it is very aligned with the new way of doing it. And hopefully the model is showcasing that it will improve the process that they were doing before. Ensure high quality input data and do more testing than what appears to be needed. When you're working with PII, there's such a need to focus on ethics and removing bias. Ideally, that data is anonymized. But you have to identify and detect bias at all stages, from the identification of the use case all the way forever and always. It needs to be continually monitored. Also need to continuously improve responsible AI practices. We work closely with the Responsible AI Institute so that we can kind of stay at the forefront of what's coming down the pipe for best practices there. And implement an AI governance team. This would be a group of individuals who can look at the models objectively, question the impacts on the end user and the quality of data being inputted. And they're one step removed, and that really helps the process. Challenge number 4, leadership. Sometimes the company simply isn't AI ready, but they don't know what use cases to work on and how to determine a strong business case. AI has become a buzzword. Companies know they need to start using it, but they don't know where to start. In most cases, they don't even know what AI can do. And often the first ideas that we hear are about really automation work rather than actually challenging business problems that can be solved by machine learning or AI. So we combat that, again, education, consistent messaging. We've seen that before. It helps with all of these challenges. Feasibility assessment right up front. Can we do it and should we do it? What are the tangible and intangible benefits? Do they, return on our investment? And then AI has to be part of this strategic plan and executive scorecards. Because if AI isn't part of that plan, it will be considered a side project and it's not going to get the time and commitment it deserves. We've seen that time and time again. Executives need to know that they're being held accountable for adoption of the AI, or it simply isn't a priority. Involvement throughout the process. Leadership often set the vision for the AI strategy and then they step back. But with something so new and impactful, they likely are going to need to stay closer to the project through to its adoption. So now I'll turn it over to Kiana to talk about some of the real life examples of adoption challenges.
Great, thanks so much, Nicole. I'm going to be able to demonstrate some of the challenges that Nicole discussed and the things that we've done and implemented at AlphaLayer to overcome the challenges through a real life example. So the use case that I'm going to discuss is an unsupervised learning problem that we worked on, where we leveraged clustering to try and identify relationships between companies and to group them together in a unique way without relying on their industry classifications. By creating meaningful clusters, we could support investment analysts and portfolio managers in their investment screening and comparison processes. Throughout the development of the proof of concept for this project, we ran into all 4 of the challenges that Nicole discussed, and I'll walk you through them one by one. Let's talk about fear. Our end users in this case for the project were fundamental investors. This means that they rely heavily on their knowledge and their past experience to make decisions, and are not very data-driven. In this case, the end users didn't fully understand how machine learning could solve their business problem. And some of the users were even quite candid with us in raising concerns about job loss. They felt that we were building technology that could do their jobs for them, and that they were at risk of losing their jobs if we started implementing more AI solutions. Now, we were able to overcome some of these concerns by holding a focus group. We invited the end users, the project sponsor, as well as senior leadership to make sure that we had representation at various levels of the client organization in the room with us. We openly listened to the users' concerns, and we reminded them of AlphaLayer's mandate. AlphaLayer is not in the business of replacing people or building robots. We believe in the power of human intelligence combined with artificial intelligence. We exist to create new layers of insights that enable investors to make more educated decisions along the way. Additionally, we walked users through very specific scenarios to explain how using the model would be beneficial for them when screening for new investments, which was really one of their primary use cases. Now, when it comes to operationalization, which, as Nicole said, you need to say very slowly to get it right, our primary challenge was really around integration. We displayed the results from our model in a dashboard that was running in the client's environment. However, the users were used to doing the majority of their analysis in Excel. So we were asking them to completely access a separate platform to conduct their research, which slowed down the adoption process quite a bit. There was a very strong change in workflow required there. In order to be able to limit this impact on workflow, we've been in the process of discussing how we can actually push insights from the model directly to the user, so that in some cases, the user might not even need to access the dashboard or the platform in order to get the benefits out of the model. Some of the other integration challenges were really working with just massive amounts of data. At one point, we were trying to load 10 million data points into a dashboard, which resulted in extremely slow load times, as you can imagine. We had to take a step back and work from the data outwards, which I think is really key in many integrations. Start with the data. We needed to be able to write efficient queries and limit the memory loads that were required and that were causing the client server to crash every time someone tried to access the dashboard. When it comes to responsible AI, Nicole talked about how this means dealing with bias, fairness, and explainability. We're lucky in a way at AlphaLayer that we work a lot with financial data, and we don't generally have access to personally identifiable information, which makes managing bias and fairness in our models easier than in some other industries. With that said, we do face significant challenges related to explainability. And in this particular use case, since we were working with an unsupervised learning problem, leveraging clustering, explainability was already inherently difficult. The users had a strong desire to understand how and why the model was clustering companies in a certain way. So in order to provide transparency, we've been working on developing variations of feature importance plots, adding additional visualizations into the dashboard to support interpretability. And we've even created a glossary that was requested by the end users to better define technical terms and provide feature calculations for all of the financial features that were used in our model. Lastly, let's talk about leadership. In this case, the value created by our solution and by this use case were largely intangible. Nicole mentioned how leaders generally measure success through cost savings or increased revenue. Here, it was extremely challenging to draw a direct line to improved investment returns or to cost savings for the organization. And so we had to be much more thoughtful about how to communicate the value of this project to make a strong business case. In order to do this, we worked with several business units at the client organization to discuss how the solution could be leveraged by multiple stakeholders for a variety of different purposes. To demonstrate this to leadership, we ended up defining very specific scenarios that showed how the model could be leveraged in day-to-day processes. Additionally, we were able to make a case around how the model and how the solution was aligned to the organization's overall AI strategy, which has been narrowed over the last few months to focus a lot more on risk mitigation and front office solutions, where this use case kind of fit nicely into that. Now, after working through plenty of challenges, we just talked about 5 or 6 different challenges, we were able to achieve very positive outcomes with this solution. The use case has been presented to several senior leaders within our client's organization, and we've been bringing on additional sponsors to help drive further development and refinement of the solution across various business units in the organization. The use case has also been identified internally at AlphaLayer as a possible candidate for product development and is being analyzed by our product team to determine if it's viable as a more general solution that can be commercialized and taken out to a variety of asset managers in the investment management industry. Now, before wrapping up today, I just want to take a minute to recognize that adoption might not always be the right option. There's 3 scenarios outlined here on the screen where it might make sense to reconsider the use case or to move on instead of forcing adoption. Now, the first is that sometimes an organization is extremely passionate about an idea or a use case, but the ROI on it just isn't there. It's our responsibility as partners and as service providers to help uncover the ROI for use cases and to communicate that to leadership. But we also don't want to be spending clients' money on solutions that are not going to create value for them. Use cases like these affect an organization's overall perception of AI because they start to make connections between low-value projects and AI, which really limits any future possibility of adoption and overall kind of AI strategy within that organization. Secondly, sometimes a use case doesn't necessarily align with the organization's strategy. At AlphaLayer, we often get requests to build back office investment management solutions that will improve efficiencies in time-consuming and normally fairly manual processes. However, our clients recently started to define a more narrow AI mandate where they'd like to focus more on the front office and alpha generation. In this case, it wouldn't make sense for AlphaLayer to take on and push adoption of a back office use case because it's not aligned with the client's narrow mandate around AI. And then lastly, in some cases, implementing an AI solution can cause massive change to existing workflows, or it can introduce a new process altogether. If your internal team or a client's team doesn't have at least one person who specializes in change management, successfully adopting these kind of AI solutions is very, very challenging. And it's worth reconsidering if that's really the right use case to move ahead with. So that's kind of a whole wrap up of AI adoption and everything that we're seeing in practice. Thank you again so much to the organizers of the symposium for inviting Nicole and I to speak. And we look forward to answering any questions during the Q&A period.
Amazing, that's really great. I'm gonna move on with the, oh, can you hear me? Okay, good, sorry about that. I just got on it. All right, my network is a bit weak, sorry about that if I cut out. Anyway, happy to meet you all. My name is Seynabou, and I'm really excited to introduce the next speaker, Maud Razafindramboa, from the Next AI Accelerator and founder development program for artificial intelligence based ventures. They have cohorts in Montreal and in Toronto, and I was actually part of the first cohort in Montreal back in like 3 years ago in 2019. So yeah, Next AI identifies talented ideas or early stage teams with ambitious solutions, and they leverage Canada's leadership position in AI to provide them with the capital, mentorship, education, and a network to disrupt the industries. So today, Maud, who's a venture manager for Next AI, will basically be presenting. We'll tell you more about the Next AI program. She holds a master's degree in business law from the Université Panthéon-Sorbonne, and she also has a certificate in international business from HEC Montreal. She has nearly 5 years of experience in business management and consulting, and as a venture manager for the Next AI Montreal team, she supports the advancements of the startup in that program. So on that note, just gonna pass it on to Maud.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So let me share my screen first. Okay. Do you see my screen? Is everything okay? Yes.
Looks good.
Okay, perfect, because I'm not able to see you, so thank you very much for that. Okay, so hello everyone, my name is Maud Razafindramboa, and I'm a venture manager at Next AI Montreal. I'm really pleased to be here today at Women in AI Symposium. So you may know Next AI is a program is one of the 3 Next Canada programs. So Next Canada is a non-profit organization. Its mission is to create world-class ventures to fuel greater prosperity in Canada. So Next Canada, what is it? That's more than 700 entrepreneurs, more than 250 ventures launched. That's more than 3,000 jobs created and more than $1 billion raised in capital. What about NextAI? NextAI, that's an accelerator and a funder development program for artificial intelligence-based ventures delivered in Montreal and Toronto. Today, I will talk about the Montreal version of the program, but there is one at Toronto as well. So what we offer? We offer a world-class program, including business and tech tracks. So a focus on business skills and tech skills. If you are selected, you will attend high-impact workshops, speaker series. We also offer non-dilutive funds, so that's $25K maximum. You'll also get access to top AI scientists and ventures managers, award-winning faculty members, access to an international network of mentors and investors as well. And we propose multiple perks with our partners. Finally, if you're accepted, you'll get access to free office space in the heart of Montreal AI Hub. So a very interesting program. Concretely, how does it work? If you are applying and accepted in the NextAI Montreal program, there are 2 options available. You can choose between an in-person participation or a remote participation, depending on the stage of development of your business. In both cases, you can get non-dilutive funds, and core academic content, classes, courses are mandatory. If you are in an in-person participation form option, access to our office space will be guaranteed. Regarding the application process, I strongly recommend applying if you meet the following criteria. First, regarding the stage of development, from ideation to validation for an in-person participation. That's okay, just an idea, discovery stage, you can still apply, but you will go in the in-person participation. If you are in the validation to efficiency stage, you can go with the remote participation option. So basically, validation means that you have an MVP, minimum viable product, and that you can start testing your market and validate your business model. Efficiency, as you know, initial proof of traction. So for instance, significant revenues. Okay, besides, of course, if you want to apply, at NextAI Montreal and NextAI, of course, AI needs to be core to your idea or your business model. At least we need to have 2 co-founders. So it's, preferably one with a business profile and one with a technical profile. But if you are all alone, it's not really a problem for now, because we also offer a platform where you can find maybe your next, co-founder. So if you have more questions about this, of course, let me know at the end of the presentation and we can talk about this later. Regarding the business model, you need to have a business model that is massively scalable. So you need to demonstrate that there is a big potential to grow. And finally, you need to be fully committed to the program during its entire duration, that is 6 months. Okay. Regarding the team, the network, as I was saying earlier, you will receive valuable content, insights, classes, lectures from internationally acclaimed faculty members, from top universities, business leaders, technical experts such as Ajay Rao, Joel Pino, Yoshua Benjo, and Ongluo, for example, but there are a lot more than that. So again, we've got a big network. So if you are if you apply, and you are accepted, you will also get access to our network of mentors. So in Montreal, we have more than 70 mentors who can guide you, who will guide you and mentor you during your participation. So successful entrepreneurs, industry experts, such as, just to name some of them, Ryan Davis, Eric Down, or Karina Besega. So unfortunately, I can't name all of them, but they are all there. Okay. Now, Next AI Montreal is only possible thanks to the support of several key partners. So we are working with the support of BMO, Power Corporation du Canada, HEC Montréal, of course, Scale AI, and the government of Quebec, of course. Regarding the team, we have two great academics leads. So Denis Grégoire is in charge with the business track. So with the content, all about the business skills you will have to develop during your participation. Laurent Charlin is in charge with the tech track of the program. Besides, during your participation, you will get support from your scientist in residence. So you'll get mentors, you'll get a scientist in residence during your participation. You can discuss your technical challenges with maybe Carlos, Paul, or Martin. You'll also be guided by our core team. So Julien Billot is our program director. Simon Dondavino is our director of operations. And you'll also have a venture manager fully dedicated to your team. So we are meeting twice a month, at least. We are there for you, like every time you need us. And so mentors, scientists in residence, and a venture manager fully dedicated to your team. So you might work with Jogral, Georges, Pedro, or myself. And if you are applying, you will probably meet our venture analyst as well, Frédéric and Souel. Okay, so just to give you maybe an overview of our last cohort. So in 2021, 27 ventures graduated from Next AI Montreal. 44% of them were in the discovery stage, 44% of them were in validation, and 12% were in efficiency. Regarding the profile of our entrepreneurs, 38% held a master's degrees, 9% were PhDs, and 6% were postdoc, and 33% of them were outside of Quebec. Finally, 16% of the venture had a female co-founder. Truth is, actually, I'm talking to you today, hoping that we would improve this for our next cohorts. So you might, maybe you've heard of some of them. So this year we have the pleasure to work with Adaptive Pulse, AgeRate, Cortic Technology, NeuroDrive, Prairie Robotics, and Wallow. So a lot of them, it was a real pleasure to work with them all. In terms of milestone, what will you get? So we had several major events during your participation. First one is a venture reveal. It's like an official presentation of 4 different ventures. Then you've got the venture showcase. During this event, ventures are pitching in front of a live and remote jury with expert, of course, and then you will have the meeting with investors, the investor meet. So that's one-on-one meetings with investors. It's at the end of the program. And finally, the venture day. So our last venture day took place on last Tuesday. And just to give you an idea, there were like 300 people that were attending the event. Timeline. If you are selected, participation will start in March. Program is running until September 2022. And the first part of the program is quite intense. We focus on your core skills. So you will work on your business and tech skills. during this first period of the participation. Second part is more focused on the market fit, and you have more time to develop your product, work with your mentors, and work by yourself, if I would say. And finally, the third part of the program focused more on the financing aspects, and you will attend public events, several public events, networking activities, and investor meetings. Okay, in terms of recruitment now, if you are interested, applications open on October 18th and will close on December 12, 2021. So there were a lot of information. So if you have any question, if you are interested, if you think that you may, fit with the criteria, don't hesitate to reach out. We can schedule a short meeting. It will be easier to explain everything. I think I will, if it's possible, I will put my email address in the chat. So don't hesitate, and we will discuss everything and every detail. So that's it for the presentation of Next AI Montreal. And thank you very much for your attention. And I really hope maybe, we will see you soon. So thank you again.
Thank you, Maud. Yeah, I mean, I can honestly just second that. That was a really amazing program, and the fact that we had our own venture managers. And you mentioned 2 meetings per month, but usually we'd have a couple more because we were in the same area and they were always available and ready to help. So yeah.
Yeah. Like I'm always there. Like we can talk every day.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. So yeah, just gonna move on to our next speakers. So our 2 speakers are 2 brilliant professors from the University of Alberta, which has been a world leader in AI research for more than 25 years. They drive research in AI and machine learning, and through the, AMI, the Alberta Machine Institute, Intelligence Institute, and their computing science department are really our leaders. And in fact, their computing science department was Canada's first computing science department. So yeah, it's really pioneers there. And the University of Alberta is sought by major AI tech companies and AI organizations like IBM, Mitsubishi, and DeepMind, which also had their first international research lab based in Edmonton. And that research lab has really close tie to the university. So yeah. Our first speaker is, as I said, an associate professor, and she works in the Department of Chemical and Material Engineering, and she's a professor of Engineering Safety and Risk Management. Her name is Dr. Lianne Lefsrud. So she uses, yay, thank you. All right, she uses mixed methods to study change agents and technology, as well as health and safety, the environment, and the regulation of all of those. Before joining the University of Alberta, she was with the Herb Institute of Global Sustainable Enterprise at the University of Michigan. And besides doing international award-winning research, she also provides policy and strategy advice to government and the industry. She has a PhD in strategic management and organization, and today she's gonna speak to us about change agents, so essentially using AI and ML and data analytics to catalyze sustainability. Really looking forward to that.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm just gonna share my screen. That's okay, just have a look here. Can everyone see that okay? Yeah, thumbs up? Yes, thumbs up. Awesome. Great. So thank you for that introduction. As was mentioned, I study change. I'm super interested in terms of sustainability. And what do I mean by that? I mean, big picture sustainability, environmental sustainability, social sustainability, economic sustainability. And when we think about, and you say, okay, how does AI, machine learning, and data analytics play into this? Well, I'm most interested in how do we make meaning of a thing? So when we see a thing, how do we understand it? What are the characteristics that are meaningful to us? How does it make us feel? What sort of values do we associate with this thing? And then how does it bring us together? And those are the kinds of questions that I really approach with regards to AI, machine learning, and data analytics. I'm really interested in what sort of computational methods can we have for studying meanings as a structural phenomena, the effects that they have on organizations, their practices, and the field structures. So I'm going to show you two projects that I'm working on currently that use AI, machine learning, and data analytics. The first one is, why are organizations blinded to hazards, leaving them ill-equipped to manage the associated risks, and in even cases can lead to fatalities? And so why do organizations, my second question, link to others in an online climate change debate? So again, I use computational methods for both of those. So for the first one, why are organizations blinded to hazards? I was called in because there was a workplace fatality in a tailings operation of an oil sands mine. And they had never seen a fatality like this before. There was a leaking tailings transportation pipeline. It was leaking on the very bottom, and it had caused, and it happened in wintertime, had caused a big cavern to be eroded underground. And this person was walking on the surface of the ground, had fallen through and had drowned. And this was a previously unknown hazard, an unseen hazard. They didn't understand it. They had previously been blinded to this hazard. So they called us in to basically say, how can we better understand the hazards that we face? It's a large organization. They have a large amount of data. And they gave us tens of thousands of incident reports. And it ended up being all 4 operators of the oil sands, plus 10 contractor companies that were involved in better understanding health and safety with regards to their mining operations. I show you this, it's a sample risk matrix. So when people talk about risk, it's a combination of severity of consequences and the likelihood and probability. For the cases of a pipeline leak, they had always leaked, they were above ground, they could see them. So it was very likely, but they had assumed that the consequences were negligible. But in this case, the consequences were severe because this person, although he saw the pipeline, he didn't see the leak and he'd fallen through and died. So this is, in this case, a very high consequence. So what we're doing in analyzing risks is taking their incident database and looking at the likelihood. So how do we count an occurrence of an incident within a certain time period, calculate the ratios of one incident type versus the total, and then think about the consequences associated with that. So is it health and safety, environment, finance, or reputation? We developed a scale using the average values from risk matrices from all participating companies, and then also classified it by type. Because if you're going to be thinking about the kinds of preventative measures you need to take or mitigations, type really helps you, because if it's a vehicle issue versus a leak or spill, it's very different prescriptions required. So again, this is a sample of the consequence matrices. Health and safety could be minor injuries, all the way up to multiple fatalities, environmental inconsequential, to off-property impact, significant adverse effects, reputation, no media coverage, to significant media coverage, and then financial, everything from less than 1 million to over 500 million. So when you're talking about then the business case for this, it becomes obvious, because what we're doing is avoiding fatalities, environmental impacts, huge reputational effects, as well as losses. So what did we do? We used analyzing the consequences using machine learning techniques in Python, so NLTK, Spicy, scikit-learn. What we looked at all incident report files, and then how do we then use them as an input to be able to think about the consequence type and the category of those. So we talked about clean data, AltaML, that's one of the barriers. It's a huge problem, of course. So we had to have them properly formatted incident reports. We read them into Python. There was a bunch of empty or null cells. And then we split the data into the test and training data. And then again, we used Python, scikit-learn, and NumPy, supervised learning. Input variables are data, time, and incident report. Output variables, actual risk, potential risk, various risk categories, as I mentioned, and risk type. So this is an example of an incident report. You can see there's spelling mistakes in here. There's acronyms. We have no idea what they mean. There's a bunch of terms, like I don't know what this means, but you can start to just look at keywords. So there's a pond, there's a pump, and a pump house. And by using keywords, then we can then say, okay, this is associated with water. It's the moving of water. It's working around water. So these are, again, sample incidents from an incident report. So then we use a TF-IDF vectorizer, tokenizing, pre-processing, removing stop words. We built this feature dictionary, transformed the incident reports into vectors, calculated the frequency, and then we fit an estimator to the data, and then to a TF, IDF representation to help us train our classifier. So we use various classification methods, and depending upon the training points that we used, we could have upwards of 70%. In a different data set, we've got over 80% accuracy with regards to classification of these different incident reports. So again, this is what is predicted by our supervised learning versus actual if we were to have someone from the company actually classify these themselves. And because these are tens of thousands of incident reports across multiple companies, it was quite a significant gain, the business cases there with regards to how do we understand this and what do we do about it. So practical application, this is exampled with regards to incidents around bodies of water, ponds, rivers, etc., where there could be drowning. So we're interested in effects to people and equipment. And you can see here, the different types of incidents are most likely to occur in March and November. Not surprising because March is when there's thawing, and November in freeze up, when there's the changing conditions. Is the ice solid? Can you step on the ice or not step on the ice? And it creates a whole bunch of additional hazards. So again, on the basis of this analysis, we were able to give them predictives so that they could train their people, understand how to better determine what they should train them for, and then put other mitigations in place to, again, save lives and prevent loss. And in this case, it's significant. Okay, the other case study I want to talk to you about is can we use AI and machine learning to understand how people connect? And this is really very similar to what AI AltaML is doing with regards to understanding clusters and how people start to cluster together and why they cluster together, right? Which is super interesting. So when I was a PhD student, I wrote a paper surveying engineers and geoscientists about their beliefs about climate change. And it was a nice paper, a sleepy little journal. What happened is it went online and it went viral. So it got picked up by a whole bunch of different people. This is the alt metrics for academics. This is how much do people actually pay attention to our work. Yes, they read it, and yes, they use it. And these are some various metrics to show how people read it and use it. And the reason why is because these engineers and geoscientists were highly emotional about climate change, sacrificing jobs at Gore's altar, killing the market, economic suicide, some highly, highly emotional language from people we think that are not usually that emotional, but here they are like spewing all this really super interesting stuff. So when it went online, it was picked up by Forbes, it was picked up by a whole bunch of different folks. And also, this language is highly, highly emotional. Deniers are extreme serial liars, evil white males. They couldn't possibly be scientists, heads of evil capitalist polluters, check your own bias. So highly, highly emotional language, which is super, super interesting to us. So of course, this looks like a research opportunity. So what's going on here? We need to understand it. It's kind of cool, right? So we know that emotion amplifies and attenuates messaging, but it also connects us. So we said to ourselves, okay, if we look at all URLs that have referenced papers like ours, Lefsrud and Meyer and others, and also those that are using climate change, global warming, or climate policy in their website name, we then examined their outgoing references to other URLs. So who are they connecting to in a hot link to others? And we looked at, are they using climate change, global warming in their website name, or their first or second order menu items, or in their about section? So how are they talking about themselves? Is this a core part of their identity as a website in terms of what they're trying to do online? And this gave us a network of 583 main domains and 4,228 bidirectional ties. So I'm hot linking to another website, and that other website is hot linking back to me. So that would be a bidirectional time. And then we also wanted to know, how are they representing themselves? So we scraped every website, every web page, and then started to code it according to moral basis. So they're talking about God. Are they talking about, evil capitalists? How are they talking about climate change and the various activists? We created a vocabulary of climate change frames. So are they denialists? Are they activists? Then we measured emotion, looking at valence and arousal. So valence, how positive or negative, and arousing, how calming or arousing is it? And then we also looked at their organizational form. Are they an environmental group, a government, a corporation? Regionally, where are they? What's their professional audience? Are they trying to speak to political orientation, science orientation, climate change orientation. So all of these different variables as alternative hypothesis of why, to understand why they start to connect to one another and the ways in which they're motivated. So this is our network. Yes, it's a spaghetti and meatballs diagram, but again, it's basically our 583 organizations bidirectional ties, and then the size of the nodes is the degree of betweenness centrality. So it's a measure of how central are they to a conversation. And what we found of all these variables, emotional similarity is the best predictor of linking. So on our x-axis, we have emotional distance. So how different is their emotion in terms of valence and arousal. And then our y-axis is the number of links that they have. And organizations, websites, and the emotions that they are expressing are more likely to link to other organizations who are expressing emotions similar to them. So that's a very interesting thing. And it's a better predictor than stance towards climate change, towards politics, towards geography, towards all these other variables and the ways in which we start to understand climate change and how people organize. So it's we thought this was a super useful insight, because emotional similarity, yes, even organizations vibe, right? They're also resonant, right, in terms of how they're and why they're connecting to one another. So super interesting. Organizations are emotional, okay, and it matters. So in some, I'm really interested in, my data isn't big, it's not millions, but it's in the tens of thousands in terms of meaning structure, and how can you understand how hazards are seen and managed, and rather than dangerously hidden. And then why do seemingly disparate organizations, and how do they link to each other? So it's a way of how do we capture attention? How do we get people to understand a problem? And then how do we get them to work collaboratively for solutions? So I love what I do. I work with a bunch of folks, and I have the benefit of having research and funding from several different groups. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lianne. That was really great. As someone who's been involved with a couple of ventures that are really focused on sustainability, I think that was really a great discussion, and I like the connections that you have with AltaML and well, yeah, the U of A. So that's really interesting, and I'm hoping that this event is gonna lead to more collaborations. We'll see.
Thank you.
My pleasure. And all right, so I'm just going to move on to Martha White, who's an associate professor of computing science and also the principal investigator for the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute. She is one of the top, which is one of the top machine learning centers in the world. So Martha holds a chair at CFAR Canada, so CFAR AI, and she also received the IEEE's AI Tends to Watch award, so on the future of AI back in 2020. She's authored more than 40 pages of top journals and conferences, and her research focuses on the development of algorithms for agents that are continually learning on streams of data. And also it has an emphasis on representation learning and reinforcement learning. Her topic for today is reinforcement learning for more adaptive control systems.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. I always love telling people about reinforcement learning. So my goal today really is to tell you what is reinforcement learning and why I think it's an important emerging technology that we're going to start seeing get incorporated more into our control systems. And I think we're also going to start moving to a world where our systems are more enjoyable to interact with because we are going to have these adaptive controllers. Okay, so I know I only have 10 minutes, so I will try to be reasonably efficient about this. So we're going to have to start off with me just telling you what reinforcement learning is. So, we're all here at an AI symposium. I'll just briefly tell you that to me, an AI system is one that improves its predictions and decisions with more experience. That's a very general setting. RL is one instance of an AI formalism, and it specifically focuses on having an agent learn through trial and error interaction and in an unknown environment. So the way I like to say it is that reinforcement learning is very general. It's sort of how we imagine we learn in the environment. You imagine you're this little robot, you're trying to navigate in this maze. So you get to take an action like drive forward. And now after you take an action, there's consequences. You're going to see an update to your observation. So maybe, for example, you see the world in front of you with a camera, and you might get a reward for if that was a good or a bad action. So if you ran into the wall, maybe you'll get some negative reward. If nothing really important happened, maybe you get no reward. And maybe if you see useful things or collect money or something, you'll get high reward. So the key things here are the trial and error learning. The agent has to actually interact with the world and gather its own experience. And the other thing is that it's an unknown environment. So we're not assuming the agent knows too much about the world. It may not have the model. And so these are it's very focused on general purpose algorithms. All right, so, because it's very focused on experience and gathering experience, to me, reinforcement learning is really about machine learning for decision-making. So just like machine learning, it's very data-driven. But as maybe more specifically, when we think of machine learning, we often think of prediction. So I might say, given this user's information, what movie might they like? Or given this patient's information, do they have a disease or do they not have a disease? So reinforcement learning similarly needs to make predictions, but it's very focused on decision making. So our agents are actually having to decide what actions to take in order to do decision making well. So as a big part of this, of course, machine learning and even deep learning methods that make predictions are very important for informing decision making. Let me just give you a couple of examples of when reinforced learning is pertinent. So I really like this application. It's actually from a colleague of mine in Amy, and it's about using RL for prosthetics. So when someone has a prosthetic, they sometimes have to use their chin in order to change the modes for their prosthetic. So they might want to change their prosthetic is controlling their wrist or shoulder and so on. It's not a very adaptive or easy to use system. So here the idea was to use RL where the agent would predict what mode the person actually wanted to be in. Did they want to be using their wrist? Do they want to be using their shoulder? And so here the agent is making different predictions about what they anticipate the user would like to have and adaptively switching right away to that mode so the person doesn't have to switch themselves. So this is, an example where the agent needs to be actually tailoring themselves to a specific user and one where they need to predict about long-term outcomes into the future. Another example, one that actually I'm pursuing myself, is RL for industrial control. I think this is one of the best use cases for RL because it's a setting where there's a little less worry about humans so much. There's a lot of experts in the system, and experts are great at getting technology to work. So I think this is a big upcoming use case for RL, and we're looking at it, using it for water treatment. So specifically, there's a lot of water treatment facilities all across Canada. They have operators, and these systems are actually hard to control and very expensive. So we would like to do something as simple as, make the energy usage more efficient. And so here what we're imagining, just like has been mentioned throughout, that we don't want to replace people, we want to augment people. So these operators are experts and they have to make lots of really important decisions. And we want to remove some of those decisions, like how to manage low-level control things like pumps that maximize energy efficiency, and people can focus on the important decisions like risk and operations. Okay, so those are sort of two settings that I'm sort of imagining when I'm talking about reinforcement learning. And then I think what is important here is, why is RL going to become more of an emergent technology? So any technology is applicable sometimes and not so good other times. So it's good to ask, what is RL actually going to give us, and when maybe shouldn't we use it? So when is it a good strategy? As a machine learning system, it's all about data and experience. And the more sensory information you have, the more context the agent has to be able to make good decisions. Also, in sensory-rich systems, we are not so good at actually incorporating all that information. So if you give me a 10,000 dimensional vector full of state information about a factory, I'm not going to be able to manage that very well. And having our agents do some of that management is good. Another setting that I think RL will be a good solution strategy is ones where we have quite a bit of stochasticity or partial observability. So those would be cases where, again, for us, it might be hard to hand code solutions, especially because we won't always know exactly all the settings we might encounter. So as an example for this, people have looked at RL for education, where we see if agents can serve questions to students, essentially build curricula for them. And each student is different. There's not a lot of information about each student. So you want the agent to be able to look at past interaction and past answers and then adjust what questions it's actually giving to different students. Those are the kinds of problems, essentially recommender system-like problems, where there's a lot of partial observability, and so learning is important. Okay, and then the last one, for some reason it's not revealing, there we go, is if you have lots of data, past interaction, let's say from previously an operator was controlling something, or even better if you have a simulator. So there actually is a lot of engineering problems out there where engineers have been working on these things for a long time. They've developed lots of really great solutions, and they've also developed lots of simulators to evaluate their solutions. And there, I think, is a setting where RL can start helping today. Okay, so leading into them, why is it maybe not the most important? You know, one thing you might ask is that engineers have been solving control problems for quite some time now. So what is RL really going to bring that is new? Don't we already have it solved, essentially? So, you know, what new insights is RL bringing? To me, there's really two key things, and then it kind of dovetails into the third one. So the first one is just now that we have much more data, we're realizing we should gather more data, we should use that data, and RL is a machine learning strategy. So it's all about handling a barrage of data. That both means high dimensional inputs, high volumes. These are things that are going to make our control systems easier to use, but are maybe harder to do from first principles models. And the other one that I think is very important is how to incorporate approximation into control. So once we move to these high dimensional systems, it's no longer possible to do very simplistic models, what maybe we call tabular models or state aggregation like models. And so a lot of RL research right now is focused on how do we use function approximation, things like deep learning, in order to still do effective control. And I think we are making progress on it, and the insights we have are going to be useful for those who want to use RL. And then, you know, one of the most important parts of RL has also been exploration, which is how does the agent actually go decide what it needs to see, what data it needs to gather in order to learn good policies. And so the exploration plus function approximation, I think, is the third important insight that RL is bringing to our systems. Okay, so finally then, you know, the question of when is RL not applicable, or maybe even further, why haven't I seen RL more in practice? I think those two questions are very related to each other. So I'm telling you here that RL, I think, is a great strategy for decision making, but you may have noticed, or maybe you have noticed, I'm not sure, but that RL doesn't seem to be as widely touted. You know, you'll hear about deep learning for speech recognition, you'll see lots of stuff about image classification, maybe a little less about RL. So let me tell you a few current limitations about actually deploying RL into the real world. So one is that there's much more concern about safety and control systems than prediction. And as a result, it just means that the technology needs to be better understood and maybe even more advanced in order to get to that level of trust needed in order to be willing to deploy it into a control setting. Sort of related to that then is that this problem formulation is quite general, the RL formulation, and the technology is relatively new. So when you put together generality and newness, it's harder to know exactly what the system is going to do. So as a result, we need expertise to identify what subproblems actually can be solved with RL. We're not going to solve the big problems with RL yet. We have to start with small subproblems, and we have to know what algorithms are going to work well for those subproblems. So here, a lack of expertise, because this technology is relatively new, I think is holding back RL from being seen more in practice. And so as we see more practitioners use RL, there's a lot of really smart people out there. They're going to actually start showing that RL is useful in the real world. Okay, and the last one is that RL and machine learning are all about generalization. And so it's harder to know or guarantee how an agent's going to behave in new situations. So the generalization property of RL, I said, is one of the most important properties, but it is both a blessing and a curse. It means that we're able to tackle a broader set of problems, but it also means we have less understanding of exactly how our agents are going to behave in new situations. So I'll just give you an example that's not an RL example, but it's a very canonical example of how our deep learning systems sometimes behave in ways that are completely unexpected or unintuitive to us. So there's this example where a system has learned to recognize different signs, let's say stop signs here, and it can perfectly accurately classify stop signs. But if you add just little small changes to it, things that have no impact on us, you and I can easily recognize that this is a stop sign. It now completely confuses the system, and it predicts that this is actually a speed limit sign of speed limit of 45, which who would have predicted that a system would make such a prediction? So the understanding a bit more about how our system generalizes is key to see it more in practice. Okay, so what is the future of RL then? So I do think we are going to see RL much more in the real world, because really for two main reasons. The first one is that I just said that learning and generalization are hard. We do have to understand this, but it does allow us to now tackle many more systems. It is harder to engineer specific solutions for certain problems. And so now we're going to be able to tackle more systems. So what that means is we're going to go from maybe simplistic solutions that we understand well to solutions that are still sort of suboptimal, but they're at least better. We're going to make some improvements there, and that's going to be worth it. It'll be worth moving to these generalization solutions. All right, and the other reason we're going to see it, I believe, is that we're going to start realizing more the importance of having adaptive systems rather than static systems. So right now, I think there's sort of a feeling that if you're allowing a system to change or learn in deployment, that's scary, that's an unsafe thing to do. But actually, I would argue it's much more the other way around, that if we deploy static systems and something in the world changes, then that agent is going to do something really stupid. Like it's going to keep trying to drive forward when there's suddenly a wall there, and it's going to damage itself. So adaptive systems are actually more robust. And as we start incorporating into our systems the ability to allow our agents to be adaptive, I think we're going to see that RL is going to be more widely adopted then as well. Okay, so sort of wrapping up, because I think I'm out of time. Wait, actually, I shall say one other thing before I wrap up, and so I'll tell you just a little bit about, as a summary, the things that I focus on my lab. So I will say those are the sort of two things I think about why RL is going to be big in the future. And I want to tell this group today that I think there's a lot of opportunity to use it in the real world. So we're sort of, I think, at the beginning of RL actually really starting to have bigger impact. It's having some impact now, it just hasn't had as big of an impact as it can. So there's a yearly workshop on RL for real life. You should go look at it. You should see what people are doing there, maybe even consider submitting to it. And if you want to become more of an expert in RL, there's a MOOC on Coursera. It's actually created by me and my colleague. Obviously, I think it's a great MOOC, and you can go learn a little bit more about RL that way. Okay, so just to finally tell you the last few key research questions in my lab. So my goal is, I don't really work on real problems yet. So I did mention that I'm starting to look at a little bit at water treatment, but I keep RL for the real world top of mind when I'm designing algorithms. So for me, these are sort of 4 key research questions I look at. How can an agent be very sample efficient? So how does it maximally use its gathered experience to learn good policies and predictions? What should the agent learn? So this question about generalization is, how's my agent going to behave under new situations? In order to answer that question, we need to know what should the agent learn so that when it comes to new parts of the world, it continues to behave in a sensible way. Another one is we actually do have lots of logs of interaction, and we should use those. Our agent shouldn't just be trying to learn only online and in deployment. So how can we use those and then let the agent continue to learn online? And maybe the most important question in my lab is, how does an agent learn a good representation of its state? And by that, I mean, how does it take all of its sensory information, both in the past and on this time step right now, and turn that into a very useful vector of attributes or features that let it make good decisions and let it adapt quickly? Thank you.
Thank you, Martha, for such a wonderful introduction to reinforcement learning, and also to explain a bit more about your research as well as the future of reinforcement learning. I'm sure that we'd like to learn more about it. We might ask more questions on it in the Q&A. So let's start with our first question to our first speaker, Nicole. Nicole, so responsible AI has been an integral part of every AI model that affects human lives. So what are some of the initiatives you've taken at AltaML to ensure the models that you build are without bias?
Our BHAG at AltaML is to impact 1 billion decisions by 2030. So impacting that many decisions at that scale, we have to recognize that there is a responsibility that we have as a firm to operate responsibly. So we take it very seriously. Our entire team must go through responsible AI training, and that's a continual process. It doesn't matter what role they hold. Our office manager, our accountants, everyone has had responsible AI training. Our practices start from the very first conversation we have with a client. We educate our clients on responsible AI, and that education and continual practices that we feed into our delivery process, they never end, all the way to the maintenance of the model. If a client doesn't recognize the importance of responsible AI, we won't move forward. We actually will fire a client if they don't recognize that that's something that's important. We would not want to work on something that does not follow responsible AI practices, best practices. And we have a partnership with the Responsible AI Institute, which brings both expert tools as well as the credibility of having a third party to the table. But what we do know is that this is such a new area and there's so much more to learn. But we do feel that Canada really has an opportunity here to, as a country, lead globally in responsible AI. If you look at our other global leaders in AI, China, the US, I'm going to guess that Canada could grab a hold of that responsible title. So we're really driven here at AltaML to be a part of that.
That's great to hear, Nicole. The role of AI studios like yourself is much more important now that you have to adopt responsible AI in the education phase as well as educating the clients as well, so that we have more data, more algorithms, more models, or more use cases that are more responsible, which are affecting human lives. I mean, that's great to hear that you even educate your office managers, which is something new that I've heard. Yeah, thank you for that insight. Can you recommend any sort of like industry certifications that you have come across that other corporates or other consulting agencies like yourself can adopt?
I haven't seen a lot of that. There's a lot of research. There's a lot of things like the Responsible AI Institute that are coming about. There's a lot of, policies and things that are coming into place, but there's nothing that's standing out yet as the leader. So we're kind of trying to be a part of all of it and hoping that we can help identify who that leader is.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thanks for your answer. So moving over to the next question to Kiana. So you have been, the project delivery manager at AltaML and AlphaLayer. So can you tell us a bit more about the challenges you might have already touched upon in your presentations, but what are those practical real-life challenges that you've faced when moving an AI use case from proof of concept to production stage?
Sure, this is something I could probably spend hours talking about, but we'll try to keep it short and sweet. So really one of the major challenges is around the technical difficulty in integrating with a whole bunch of different systems. So every client we work with tends to have their own variation of something. And so our technical teams focus heavily on building everything in the most agnostic way possible. Our developers are certified in AWS, they're certified in Azure, they're certified in a whole bunch of different things, so that no matter what infrastructure our clients use, we have the expertise somewhere in the organization to support that integration into a client's environment. I think the other thing there that's really key is building partnerships, building strong relationships with IT teams and technical teams at your client, so that they're there to support you through the process, making sure that you have all of the security permissions you need, making sure that there's sufficient memory or sufficient number of cores or whatever you need on a server to actually be able to host the application. A lot of that you don't have direct control over when you're integrating into a client's environment. So it's key to be able to find the people within that organization that can also be your champions and help you along through that process.
Great. Thanks, Kiana. So, like you touched a bit about, being scared to enter into AI strategy and AI solutions. So, what do you think that a corporate would be prepping themselves before they move into getting a planning for an AI solutions for their business use case? Do you have some advices for the corporates?
That's a really good question as well. Nicole talked about how education is a kind of a key component to being able to overcome fear. And I would double down on that, absolutely. We often provide AI and ML 101 sessions right at the onset. Before maybe even signing a deal with a client, we often provide those sessions. And I guess on top of that, we also provide a whole bunch of prep material to the two leaders in these organizations that contain videos. They contain kind of quick read articles with really the foundation so that they're not coming into these conversations completely blind. We make sure then that we have, at least in early stage conversations, we've got people with the business backgrounds and the technical backgrounds that are really able to interpret and translate some of the more technical concepts into plain English, so that the people that we're working with that might not be data scientists or might not be overly familiar with AI can truly understand what it is that we're talking about.
Okay, that's awesome. There's one more question for AltaML. Any of you can take that. So are there any other technologies in the past that had similar challenges for adoption to AI, and were you able to leverage lessons from that? Or is AI uniquely different?
I will let Nicole maybe add on, and I think that this is something that we have probably seen in the past. We've seen things, I mean, I don't necessarily want to go as far as calling AI a revolution, but we've seen the Industrial Revolution. We've seen a whole bunch of other large changes in human history where things didn't happen overnight. It really took, a whole bunch of people across countries, across the world to really get on board with a new technology in order to kind of promote and get widespread adoption on that.
Yeah, I would agree with Kiana. This isn't the first time we're going through a societal change management, but I do think it's one that's trying to move the fastest with the significant investment in it. I feel like in the past, when you look at even just when SaaS opportunities were coming out, they weren't moving this fast. There wasn't so much dollars going into it and so many different use cases of it that impacted so many different people. And if a SaaS software doesn't work, I don't feel it creates as large of a risk than in many cases, many of the AI applications. If an autonomous driving vehicle makes a mistake, that's a huge risk. If Bamboo HR doesn't work right for our company and doesn't store some of our company data, we're okay. But, a car crash is a very different thing.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for the answer. Thank you, Kiana, as well. So the next question is for Maud. From your experience being at NextAI Montreal, can you share some tips or advice for budding entrepreneurs to succeed in their startup journey?
Well, obviously you can do a lot of things, but if I have to choose maybe 3 tips, I would say that when you are starting your business or you are already in business, first of all, maybe surround yourself with the right people, find trusted mentors, don't hesitate to reach out, ask for help. Network is crucial, so cultivate your network wisely. And same for your team, like build your team carefully as well. Be sure you share the same vision. And remember, at the beginning, invest more in people than in ID. So you know what we say, like, you know, I think it's something like great people make great company. So keep that in mind. Second important thing, be prepared. Always have a plan B, a plan C, because nothing is really going according to plan. So be sure that you are well prepared. And there's a lot, but I think finally, most importantly, take care of yourself, like always, because we often underestimate the importance of health, mental health, and you can't do anything if you're not there anymore. So, of course, like I think we forget that very often. So, take care of yourself. Yeah.
Thank you, Maud. So there are two questions. Maybe that's something related to as well. So it seems like every organization will become an AI organization in the future. So how do startups attract talents for the development of technology? I'm sure that next time Montreal has a alumni network, they also help attract talent for their own, part of the candidates. So could you speak a little more about that?
Well, you know, I think here again, it's a matter of network, right? Like, you know, it's like you need to maybe, you know, try to go outside of your zone of comfort and, you know, meet people and discuss your project and your solution. Don't be afraid of sharing. Of course, you know, try to keep everything like in control while you're doing this, like, you know, try to protect yourself as well. But I think the better way is to go outside, meet people, network, and, you know, try to benefit from programs as Next AI, accelerators, Women in AI, because there is a lot of resources. Sometimes it's maybe difficult to find the right resource, but they are there. So you know, just discuss, connect, and I think it's the best way. Like, I don't know if I really answered the question correctly, but it's what I'm coming to my mind.
Thank you, Maud. Thank you, Nicole, also for answering that question on the chat. So our next question is for Dr. Lianne. So you're coming from an engineering background and doing research using AI and ML tools. So what would be your advice for graduates from non-CS background if they're interested in using AI or ML in their research?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So there's a lot of materials online at Coursera, like Martha's course, Udemy, Code Academy. There's textbooks. There's different ways in which people can learn. Python is nice because it's kind of plug and play in terms of coding. So I think it's a very accessible, fun, easy. I wouldn't say easy, not always easy, but it's very problems and solutions oriented. So I think Python is really great in that regard. I'm also seeing more and more certificates in AI. So it's not just about how do you attract people into computer science, but it's also how do you have that cross collaboration of folks in engineering, you know, in whatever, chemical engineering, starting to use AI machine learning principles. Can they take computer science courses? Can they get a certificate, a postgraduate degree? So there's a lot of different ways that folks can skill themselves up, reskill, pivot their careers, because it is, I forget who mentioned that, Martha, you know, and Nicole and Kiana. I mean, every organization is going to be a reinforcement learning, AI machine learning type organization, because there is this onslaught of data. How do we make sense of it? How do we use it? How do we make decisions, the best decisions based on it? And those are, I think, you know, it's like learning how to read and write English. Like, I think it's going to be right up there in terms of the skills needed for the future in terms of making sense of this all. And I'd rather be in the driver's seat or you know, programming or coding the car, as opposed to, you know, just the pedestrian on the street corner wondering if I'm going to be hit when I walk across the street. So I'd much rather be part of the solution rather than anything. So there are a lot of resources available, and for folks who are interested, and I'm so glad to hear that you're posting this on what is it, YouTube or something afterwards, because I think this is, you know, the great kinds of conversations that we need to be having. It's not just this tiny group of computer scientists. It can be a much more broader group of folks that are doing this kind of work. So good question. Thank you.
Thank you, Lianne, for that you know, detailed explanation and sharing your advice. So our last question is for Dr. Martha. So you've touched a bit on, what is exciting and, what are you working on in the reinforcement learning space. So how do you see the future of reinforcement learning in terms of advancement as well as applications in industry? Which specific industry that do you think that it will be most used and why?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I did mention that I think industrial control systems where there is already lots of sensors and there's a low level control aspect that is hard for people. And currently it's been more engineered or hand coded, and engineers can easily then incorporate this new tool and ask, how can I make my solution better? So we're sort of giving RL to the experts to then figure out how to make their systems better. It's one of the safest places, I think, to incorporate technology. So I'm hoping that engineers are going to start learning about RL as a standard tool in their toolbox. So I think that's one step where we're going to go forward. But I think we're also actually seeing people in different areas that are learning about RL, and they're seeing how to take it and solve their problems. So for example, people in the medical field are asking, how can we get treatment suggestions using RL? And I've seen some really cool papers recently, actually, where they actually take real logs of data and they show that the system they produce that is based on RL, they formalize their problem as a Markov decision process. They use some RL solution strategies, and they find that the treatment suggestions are actually better than average, which is really cool. And then I've seen it for other things you might not even guess it would be used for, things like designing physical systems. There's a recent paper about chip design and chip placement, and it's a really hard, big combinatorial optimization problem. And that's sort of where the new strategies for approximation, things like function approximation, can come in and help us tackle these really big search problems by just incorporating approximation. So anyway, I guess my answer there was probably industrial control first. Other things that involve people are going to be harder, but I think there's all these amazingly smart people in different areas that are already starting to figure out how to use it for their problem.
Thank you so much, Martha. So I would like to thank all the speakers for joining us. I would, thank you for answering all the questions. So I'd like to hand over to Shiyamali for her closing remarks.
Thank you, Frincy. Thank you, everyone. Now we have come to the end of this event. It was a great amount of information. I'm sure we all learned something, great tips and techniques that will help us to adapt in our business or organization, or even lead us to do some of our future research projects. So if you are interested in learning more about our speakers' work or researchers, please visit their website. We have actually posted their linked website links and the LinkedIn links on our chat box. Please feel free to reach out to any of our speakers today. My sincere thanks to our panelists for taking your time out today and your busy schedule to engage with us this afternoon and to share your valuable information. And I also like to thank Frincy and Seynabou for your all great support in making this event happen. But last but not least, our huge audience, and thank you for engaging and continuously helping us to support, and we're looking forward to many more of these events to come. If you missed any parts of this conversation today, you can actually watch it in our YouTube channel, which we will be posting on our LinkedIn very soon, so you can keep out for that. So hope you had an interesting time, and this is it, and I wish you all success, and keep in touch by subscribing to our LinkedIn page for future updates. Thank you, everyone.